Tonight, I want to speak to you about a truth so simple that the world has overlooked it, and yet so powerful that when understood, it rearranges the very structure of your life. This truth is not found in effort, not in waiting, not in begging the universe for permission. It is found in one quiet decision to act as if what you desire is already yours. Not someday, not when circumstances improve, now, because the moment you accept something internally as done, the outer world has no choice but to follow. Most people live their lives as if they are reacting to reality, as if the world outside is the cause and the mind within is the effect. They wait for proof before they believe, for results before they feel secure, for permission before they assume. But life does not work that way. Reality is not leading you, it is following you. Every condition you experience today is an echo of an inner state you once occupied, knowingly or unknowingly. And if this is true, and it is, then changing your life does not require force, struggle, or manipulation. It requires a shift in assumption. When I say act as if it's yours, I do not mean pretending with empty words or forcing a smile while fear still rules your inner world. I mean something far deeper. I mean entering the state of ownership inwardly. Ownership is not a future event, it is a present feeling. When something is yours, you no longer yearn for it. You no longer obsess over it. You do not anxiously check for signs. You rest. You move differently. You speak differently. You expect differently. And that expectation is creative. Think of how you behave when you know something belongs to you. You do not chase it. You do not convince anyone of it. You do not ask repeatedly if it will happen. You simply live from the quiet certainty that it is done. That certainty is not loud. It does not shout. It does not argue. It knows, and knowing is the seed of miracles. The world has taught you to believe that circumstances must change first before you are allowed to feel fulfilled. But fulfillment is not a reward, it is a cause. The feeling of having must come before the experience of having. This is the great reversal that few understand. The inner world is not a reflection of the outer is a projection of the inner. You are not here to chase outcomes. You are here to select states of consciousness. Every desire you have ever held is not random. It is an invitation to step into a new state of being. The desire itself implies fulfillment. You would not hunger for what could not be digested by your consciousness. But the mistake people make is that they stand outside the desire, admiring it from afar, treating it as something separate from themselves. And as long as you see it as separate, it must remain so. To act as if it's yours is to collapse the distance between you and the desire. It is to stop looking at it and start looking from it. This is where transformation begins. When you act from the end, the means rearrange themselves without your interference. Life becomes cooperative. People change. Opportunities appear. Events align. And you may call it coincidence, luck, or chance, but it is none of those. It is law. You must understand that the world is not responding to your words or affirmations. It is responding to your state. You can repeat positive statements all day long, but if inwardly you still identify as the one who lacks, struggles, and waits, the world will faithfully reflect that identity back to you. The mirror never argues, it only reflects. Ask yourself honestly, who would I be if this were already mine? How would I breathe? How would I walk into a room? How would I make decisions? How would I speak to myself in silence? The answers to these questions are not intellectual, they are felt, and once you feel them even briefly, you have touched the state. That is enough. You do not need to maintain the feeling every second of the day. You do not need to strain or watch your thoughts with fear. One genuine acceptance is more powerful than 1,000 forced repetitions. When you truly accept something is done, your nervous system relaxes. Your mind quiets. You stop pushing. And paradoxically, that is when movement begins. Miracles are not violations of natural order. They are the natural result of alignment. When the inner assumption matches the desired outcome, the outer world reorganizes to match it. The miracle is not that something appears suddenly. The miracle is that you change states and the world obeyed. There will be moments when the senses contradict your assumption. This is where most people retreat. They look at appearances and surrender their inner authority. But the senses are late reporters. They only tell you what you have already been. If you allow current circumstances to dictate your inner state, you remain trapped in repetition. Freedom comes when you let your inner state dictate what circumstances must become. Acting as if it's yours does not mean denying reality. It means choosing the cause over the effect. It means understanding that what you see now is not final. It is transitional. And transitions are not negotiated with fear, they are guided by faith. Not blind faith, but experiential knowing. When you occupy the state of ownership, something subtle but profound happens. You stop trying to make it happen. You stop asking how. You stop seeking reassurance. The neediness dissolves. And neediness is what blocks fulfillment, because need implies absence. Presence attracts presence. You were never meant to force life into submission. You were meant to assume your place as its source. The moment you accept this, you realize that manifestation is not about getting, it is about being. You do not get what you want, you experience what you are. And this is why acting as if is not deception, it is alignment. You are not lying to yourself, you are selecting a state that already exists. Every possible version of your life exists now. You do not create it from nothing, you enter it by assumption, and once entered, it feels natural, effortless, normal. This is how you know you have done it correctly. Do not wait for permission from the world to feel whole. Do not postpone peace until conditions comply. Peace is the signal. Satisfaction is the invitation. When you feel it as though it is already yours, you have given life a blueprint to follow. Watch how differently people treat you when you stop seeking validation. Watch how opportunities arise when you stop chasing them. Watch how problems resolve themselves when you stop identifying with struggle. This is not magic, this is alignment. You may ask, what if I fail? But failure belongs to effort, not assumption. You cannot fail at being. You either occupy a state or you don't. And if you find yourself slipping back into doubt, do not condemn yourself. Gently return. Assumption is not maintained through force, but through familiarity. Spend time inwardly experiencing what it feels like to live from fulfillment. Not in long sessions, but in natural moments. As you fall asleep, as you wake up, as you imagine tomorrow from the standpoint of success rather than hope, these moments are seeds. And seeds do not need constant attention. They need faith in their own intelligence. Life knows how to grow what you plant. Your job is not to dig up the seed to check if it's working. Your job is to plant it in the soil of conviction and let go. The world you see tomorrow will be shaped by what you accept today. So choose wisely, choose boldly, choose as though you understand that consciousness is the only reality. Because when you act as if it's yours, you are not tempting fate, you are instructing it. And then, quietly, without strain, without announcement, miracles begin to appear, not because you begged for them, but because you became the one who expects them. Because expectation is not something you do, it is something you live from. And when expectation becomes your natural posture, life adjusts around it effortlessly. You will notice that events begin to flow toward you without force, without persuasion, without planning. What once required struggle now arrives through ease. What once seemed distant now feels inevitable. This is the quiet power of assumption working beneath the surface. There is a difference between hoping and knowing, and most people spend their lives oscillating between the two without realizing that hope still implies absence. Hope looks forward, knowing rests now. The moment you shift from hope into knowing, you step out of time. You are no longer waiting for a future version of yourself to arrive. You are embodying that version in the present moment, and presence is creative. Acting as if it's yours does not demand dramatic external action. It is not about spending money you don't have or making declarations to impress others. It is an inner posture, invisible to the world but powerful enough to move it. It is the way you sit with yourself when no one is watching. It is the tone of your inner conversations. It is the assumptions you make when something unexpected happens. Do you immediately return to fear, or do you remain anchored in certainty? Your inner conversations are the true indicators of the state you occupy. Listen to how you speak to yourself when you are alone. Listen to the silent statements you repeat when things go quiet. Those statements are not innocent, they are creative acts. When you act as if it's yours, your inner dialogue changes naturally. You no longer argue with life. You no longer rehearse disappointment. You begin to expect cooperation. And expectation is powerful because it is relaxed. It does not tense the body or strain the mind. It allows, it permits, it assumes the best without needing proof. This is why children manifest so effortlessly. They assume, They do not analyze probability. They do not consult logic. They accept imaginatively, and life responds accordingly. The adult mind, conditioned by repetition and disappointment, forgets this simplicity. It learns to protect itself by doubting first, believing later. But protection is not creation. Safety is not fulfillment. To act as if it's yours requires courage, not recklessness, but the courage to trust your inner authority over external evidence. Understand this deeply. The world is not punishing you, it is training you. Every delay is showing you where you still look outside for confirmation. Every obstacle reveals a place where you have not fully assumed. This is not failure, it is feedback, and feedback is valuable when interpreted correctly. When something does not move immediately, do not ask, why isn't it working? Ask instead, who am I being right now? Because the question is never about the desire. The desire is innocent. The question is always about identity. Identity PR. Seeds experience. And when identity shifts, experience follows as naturally as a shadow follows the body. You are not meant to micromanage the unfolding. The moment you try to control the how, you step out of the state of ownership and back into the state of striving. Ownership trusts the process because it knows the outcome. It does not interfere, it does not panic, it does not rush. There is a sacred patience that emerges when you truly accept something as yours. Not the patience of waiting, but the patience of certainty. The kind of patience that says, it is done, and therefore I am at ease. This ease is magnetic. Life moves toward ease. Act as if it's yours even when the senses argue otherwise, especially then, because the senses only report what has already been impressed. They cannot see what is being formed. They are witnesses, not judges. When you grant them authority, you surrender creative power. When you acknowledge them without obedience, you remain free. You do not need to fight doubt. Doubt dissolves when you stop feeding it attention. Return again and again to the feeling of naturalness. Ask yourself, if this were already true, would I be worrying right now? And gently release the worry, not by force, but by recognition. The state of ownership is quiet. It does not boast, it does not compare, it does not rush to tell others, it simply lives. And because it lives, it expresses. Life has no choice but to echo it. This is how miracles enter unnoticed. They do not announce themselves with thunder. They appear as normal developments, ordinary events, casual encounters. You may even forget that you once desired what now feels obvious. That is the final sign of alignment, when fulfillment feels natural rather than extraordinary. Do not underestimate the power of small inner shifts. A single assumption held gently but consistently outweighs hours of effort driven by fear. Consistency of being matters more than intensity of wanting. You do not need to overwhelm the mind. You need to convince it through familiarity. Let yourself become familiar with the feeling of already having. Visit it often, briefly, lovingly. Let it feel real without pressure. Over time, it will feel like home. And what feels like home is where life builds. The moment you stop seeing acting as if as pretending and start seeing it as selecting, everything changes. You are not deceiving yourself. You are choosing which version of yourself to animate. And animation brings form. Stay in the assumption long enough, and you will notice something profound. You are no longer trying to manifest. You are simply living. And life, obedient and faithful, continues to reflect that inner decision in ways that feel effortless, natural, and inevitable. Inevitable, because inevitability is the signature of truth. When something is truly accepted within, it carries a weight that circumstances cannot resist. You no longer ask whether it will happen. You only notice how calmly you move through your days. The urgency fades. The constant mental rehearsal of what if dissolves. In its place appears a grounded stillness. And that stillness is not emptiness, it is fullness. This fullness changes how you relate to time. You stop measuring progress by days and weeks and begin to sense that everything is unfolding in its proper order. Acting as if it's yours frees you from impatience, because impatience belongs to those who believe they are still waiting. When you know, you allow, and allowing is the highest form of power. You may observe that once you enter this state, life tests it, not to punish you, but to stabilize it. Situations may arise that tempt you to return to old reactions. Voices may whisper that you were foolish to believe, but these moments are in. Citations, not obstacles. They ask a single question: will you remain loyal to your inner assumption, or will you surrender it for temporary evidence? Loyalty to the inner state is the discipline of the awakened, not discipline through force, but through preference. You begin to prefer peace over panic, certainty over speculation, assumption over reaction. And preference shapes destiny. The outer world begins to mirror this loyalty in subtle ways. Conversations shift, doors open without effort. People respond differently to your presence. You may not immediately connect these changes to your inner shift, but they are related. The world is exquisitely sensitive to who you believe yourself to be. Acting as if it's yours also dissolves comparison. When you know something is yours, you are not threatened by others who appear to have it first. Their success does not diminish yours, it confirms possibility. Envy fades because envy belongs to the state of lack. Ownership has no rivals. You start to recognize that everything you once admired in others was pointing you back to a potential within yourself. Desire was never about acquiring, it was about remembering. Remembering who you are capable of being when you release the old identity that says, not yet. Identity is the quiet ruler of experience. Change the ruler, and the kingdom reorganizes itself. Acting as if it's yours is an identity shift, not a technique. Techniques fade, identity remains. This is why true change feels permanent, not fragile. As this assumption deepens, your reactions soften. Challenges no longer feel personal. Delays no longer feel threatening. You stop interpreting life as resistance and start seeing it as choreography. Everything is moving, even when it appears still. There is a deep trust that grows from this way of living. Not trust in circumstances, but trust in yourself as the source. You realize that no experience has power over you unless you grant it meaning. Meaning shapes emotion. Emotion shapes state. State shapes reality. You become more present, not because you force mindfulness, but because anxiety loses its function. Anxiety was a byproduct of waiting. When waiting ends, anxiety has nothing to feed on. Presence emerges naturally. Even your desires change. You no longer crave from emptiness. You choose from fullness. You begin to desire what aligns with your expanded sense of self. This is refinement, not limitation. It is clarity. The phrase, act as if it's yours, begins to feel less like instruction and more like description. You are not trying to act, you simply are. And being is effortless. This inner shift affects the body as well. Tension releases. Breathing deepens. Sleep improves. The nervous system recognizes safety because certainty communicates safety. The body responds to belief just as faithfully as the outer world does. When moments of doubt arise, and they may, you do not dramatize them. You let them pass like clouds. You do not argue with them. You do not analyze them. You return to the state you know. Familiarity dissolves resistance. Life becomes less about control and more about consent. You consent to the version of reality that matches your inner choice, and reality complies. You may notice that you stop explaining yourself, you stop justifying your confidence, you stop defending your vision. Explanation belongs to uncertainty, knowing stands alone. And in this quiet knowing, something extraordinary continues to unfold, not as a climax, not as a conclusion, but as a steady, unfolding confirmation of the inner decision you made when you chose to act as though what you desired was already yours, and allowed that assumption to live through you without interference, without impatience, without fear. Fear because fear cannot survive in an environment of inner certainty. It may attempt to visit, but it cannot stay. Certainty is inhospitable to doubt. When you live from the assumption of ownership, fear loses its authority, and without authority it fades into irrelevance. You begin to notice that life no longer feels like a series of problems to solve, but a sequence of experiences to move through. Even challenges are stripped of their heaviness. They become moments of adjustment rather than evidence of failure. You respond instead of react, and response is creative. Acting as if it's yours refines your perception. You stop seeing obstacles as walls and start seeing them as instructions. Instructions not about what to do, but about who to remain. Remain faithful to the state, and the path reveals itself. The path does not appear first, the state does. The world teaches you to look for reassurance in outcomes, but mastery teaches you to find reassurance in alignment. When you are aligned, outcomes are secondary. They follow naturally without strain. You stop chasing confirmation and start recognizing resonance. There is a subtle joy that accompanies this way of being, not the excitement of anticipation, but the satisfaction of knowing. It is quiet, steady, and deeply grounding. This joy does not depend on circumstances. It exists because identity has shifted. You may find that you become less interested in convincing others. You no longer need agreement to sustain belief. Your inner conviction is sufficient, and paradoxically, this self-sufficiency draws support without asking for it. When you act as if it's yours, you stop postponing life. You stop telling yourself, when this happens, then I'll relax, then I'll be happy, then I'll be confident. You relax now. You live now. You express now. And life responds now. The past loses its grip. Old stories lose their emotional charge. They may still be remembered, but they no longer define you. You have moved into a new reference point. From here, memory serves wisdom, not identity. This state also changes how you approach effort. Effort becomes inspired rather than forced. You act when it feels natural, not because you are afraid of missing out. Action flows from being, not the other way around. You trust your impulses more. You follow intuition without overthinking. You recognize that intuition is simply alignment expressing itself through movement. When you are in the right state, even ordinary decisions carry extraordinary precision. The idea of timing transforms. You realize that nothing arrives late. It arrives when you are ready to receive it without resistance. Readiness is not about preparation, it is about acceptance. Acting as if it's yours is the ultimate form of acceptance. You stop measuring your worth by outcomes. Worth becomes inherent, and when worth is inherent, you are no longer negotiating with life. You are participating in it. This participation feels natural, fluid, unforced. You are no longer standing outside your life, analyzing it. You are inside it, living it, and life responds to participation far more generously than it responds to observation. Gradually, the distinction between imagination and reality dissolves. What you once considered inner and outer begin to feel like different expressions of the same movement. You understand, not intellectually but experientially, that consciousness is primary. And from this understanding, you no longer ask how miracles happen. You recognize that miracles are simply the natural behavior of reality when it encounters a consciousness that knows what it is and does not argue with its own assumptions. You continue to live, to move, to choose from this place, not expecting applause, not seeking proof, but remaining in quiet agreement with the version of yourself that already knows, already has, already is, and allows life to keep revealing that truth in forms that feel increasingly ordinary, increasingly familiar, increasingly aligned to the point where surprise itself changes its meaning. What once would have felt shocking now feels appropriate, as though life is simply catching up with a decision you made long ago within yourself. You stop being impressed by manifestation and start being impressed by how natural it feels when inner and outer finally agree. This agreement creates coherence. Thoughts, emotions, and actions move in the same direction. There is no inner argument, no split attention, and where there is coherence, there is power. Power not as force, but as clarity. Clarity eliminates resistance. You begin to notice that your attention becomes more selective. You no longer dwell on what does not serve the state you have chosen, not out of denial, but out of disinterest. Attention flows naturally toward what confirms your inner assumption, and whatever does not align quietly fades into the background. This is not avoidance, it is authorship. You are authoring experience by choosing where awareness rests. Awareness is creative. What you consistently notice grows. What you ignore loses momentum. As this way of being deepens, you develop a profound respect for your inner world. You recognize that every thought is an invitation, every feeling a doorway. You stop entertaining inner conversations that contradict your chosen state, not because you are suppressing them, but because they no longer feel true. Truth has a tone. It feels settled. It feels calm. When you act as if it's yours, you are tuning into that tone. Anything that feels frantic, desperate, or heavy reveals itself as misalignment, and you gently let it go. You also realize that you no longer need dramatic visualizations. A simple knowing carries more weight than elaborate imagery. The image served its purpose when you needed to convince yourself. Now conviction has replaced technique. Life responds to this simplicity with elegance. Solutions appear without drama. Opportunities arrive through ordinary channels. People say the right thing at the right time without knowing why. You recognize these moments not as miracles in the sensational sense, but as confirmations of order. You begin to trust silence. Silence is no longer empty, it is fertile. In silence, assumption deepens. In silence, the inner decision roots itself. You are not compelled to fill the space with effort or affirmation. Being is enough. Even uncertainty, when it appears, no longer frightens you. You understand that uncertainty is part of transition, not contradiction. It is the mind adjusting to a new identity. You allow the adjustment without interference. The more you live from this state, the less you feel the need to revisit the old one. The old identity feels like clothing you've outgrown. You may remember it, but you do not return to it. This shift affects how you see others as well. You stop trying to change them. You realize that your perception of them is tied to your state. As you change, they change in your experience. Relationships soften, or they dissolve naturally, without conflict. You no longer force gratitude. It arises spontaneously. Gratitude is no longer for what you hope to receive, but for the stability of knowing. It becomes a background tone rather than a practice. There is a quiet dignity that emerges from acting as if it's yours. You carry yourself differently, not arrogantly, but assuredly. You do not need to announce confide. It is sensed. You begin to understand that the world is not something you enter each morning. It is something you emerge into. Your state determines the version of the world you meet. Change the state, and the world you encounter changes with it. And so you continue, day by day, moment by moment, not chasing outcomes, not resisting appearances, but remaining faithful to the inner agreement you made, allowing life to keep responding in ways that feel increasingly coherent, increasingly supportive, increasingly reflective of the simple, quiet decision to live as though what you desire is already yours, and to let that assumption keep shaping experience without interruption. Because interruption only occurs when attention wavers, and attention now rests more easily in the chosen state. You are no longer guarding it anxiously, you are inhabiting it naturally. It feels lived in, familiar, like a room you have returned to rather than one you are trying to enter. This familiarity changes your emotional responses. You are less reactive to news, to opinions, to temporary fluctuations. You understand intuitively that these are surface movements, not indicators of direction. Direction has already been set inwardly. Surface movement adjusts to match it. You may notice that your sense of urgency dissolves further. Urgency belonged to the one who believed something essential was missing. Now movement happens without pressure. You act when action feels aligned, and you rest when rest feels appropriate. Both are productive because both arise from certainty. Even mistakes lose their sting. You stop interpreting them as signs that you are off track. You recognize them as course corrections that do not threaten the destination. The destination is not in question, only the route refines itself. You begin to feel less impressed by external authority. Advice no longer overrides inner knowing. You listen, but you decide from within. This is not stubbornness, it is self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of creative power. Acting as if it's yours also changes your relationship with imagination. Imagination stops being a place you visit and becomes the place you live from. It informs perception, expectation, and response. You no longer separate inner vision from daily life. It quietly directs it. The body continues to respond. You may feel lighter, steadier, more grounded. This is not imagined. The body mirrors belief just as faithfully as circumstances do. When belief stabilizes, the body follows. You become less concerned with explaining how things will happen. You understand that explanation is the mind's attempt to control. Control gives way to cooperation. Life is not something to be managed, it is something to be partnered with. This partnership feels intelligent. You notice timing improving, decisions aligning, effort yielding more. You are not doing more, you are resisting less. Resistance was the real labor all along. The need to constantly monitor your thoughts diminishes. You no longer fear a stray doubt undoing everything. Your dominant state has weight now. It absorbs inconsistencies rather than being threatened by them. You understand that persistence is not repetition, but residence. You persist by remaining, not by trying harder. Remaining becomes easier as the state integrates. The world begins to feel more responsive, more conversational. You sense that life is answering something you are silently stating through being, and that silent statement is steady. You do not rush toward an ending because there is no sense of until. Life is not on hold. Fulfillment is not postponed. You are already living from the place you once imagined. And so experience continues to unfold from this position, not as a finale, not as a conclusion, but as an ongoing expression of the assumption you chose to embody, allowing each moment to rise from that choice and shape itself accordingly, without force, without finality, without needing to arrive anywhere else, because the sense of elsewhere has dissolved. You are no longer orienting yourself toward a distant point in time or circumstance. You are oriented inwardly, and from that orientation, movement feels natural rather than driven. Life is not something you chase, it is something that unfolds in response. This unfolding teaches you patience of a new kind, not the patience that waits with tension, but the patience that trusts with ease. You no longer count signs or measure progress obsessively. You understand that growth happens invisibly before it becomes visible, and you are comfortable with that invisibility. Your relationship with uncertainty continues to soften. You stop trying to eliminate, and instead allow it to exist without interpretation. Uncertainty becomes neutral, no longer a threat to your assumption. You realize that certainty does not mean knowing every detail. It means knowing who you are, being regardless of detail. You begin to sense an inner consistency that was once missing. Decisions feel clearer. Conflicts resolve more quickly, sometimes without words. You notice that you are less inclined to defend yourself because defense implies vulnerability, and vulnerability has been replaced by grounded assurance. This assurance is quiet. It does not seek attention. It does not announce itself. It simply informs how you move, how you speak, how you listen. Others may feel it before you consciously recognize it yourself. You find that you are less tempted to revisit old narratives. The stories that once explained your limitations no longer feel relevant. They lose emotional charge. They added not because you fight them, but because you have stopped living from them. Acting as if it's yours also refines your sense of choice. You recognize that choice is not primarily about actions, but about interpretation. Two people can experience the same event and live in completely different realities based on the state from which they interpret it. You choose interpretation deliberately now. This deliberate choice does not feel heavy. It feels intuitive. You sense when an interpretation aligns with your state and when it does not. Alignment becomes your compass. You may notice that even silence from the world no longer unsettles you. Periods of apparent stillness feel like integration rather than delay. You trust that something is aligning beneath the surface. Because you are aligned within, your expectations stabilize further. They are no longer emotional spikes that rise and fall. They become a steady baseline. You expect things to work out, not with excitement, but with calm certainty. This calm affects how you experience effort. When effort arises, it feels purposeful, not draining. When rest arises, it feels deserved, not guilty. You move in rhythm rather than resistance. You also begin to recognize how little force was ever required. You see in hindsight that much of what you called trying was actually doubting. As doubt fades, so does unnecessary effort. The sense of separation between inner life and outer life continues to blur. Thoughts, feelings, and events feel like parts of one continuous movement rather than separate domains. You experience coherence instead of conflict. And so the assumption deepens further, not through repetition, not through persuasion, but through lived experience, allowing each moment to quietly confirm the decision you made, to live from ownership rather than anticipation, and to let that lived assumption continue expressing itself in ways that remain open, ongoing, and unconcluded. Here is a strong, elevated conclusion that gently closes the entire speech while staying true to the same Neville-style consciousness, without naming him, and with a sense of quiet authority rather than dramatic finality. So understand this, and let it settle not as an